Welcome to the HawgBeat Half Hour presented by Bet Saracen. I'm Jackson Collier with HawgBeat, alongside our managing editor, Daniel Fair, as well. We've got a great show ahead of you today. I got a good friend of mine, Collins Hickman. He's an associate over at Wright, Lindsey, Jennings Sports Law. And he's joining us today to talk about NIL, rev share, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, Collins, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, before we get into all that, we have a ton of other stuff to talk about, including great stuff from Rowback's Game Day Apparel. There's only one way to describe Rowback: best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Rowback, they are completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rowback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, from everyday shorts, or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. Use the code HAW20, that is HAW20, on Rowback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers through the end of this week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. And that's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with code HAW20, HAW20. All right. So Arkansas is in an interesting spot right now, Collins. You're an expert in the NIL, the rev share field. Hunter Yurachek kind of set Arkansas social media ablaze last week with some comments he made talking about the Razorbacks not being able to compete for a national championship in football. They're able to compete in other sports, but not in football. What are your thoughts on those comments, and what does that mean for Arkansas in the NIL and the rev share era?
Yeah, Hunter tends to go viral at Footer Rock Touchdown Club. I was there last year when he shook some feathers about wanting $10,000 or $100 from 10,000 families in the state. So it was just another viral sensation. The comments were interesting. A part of me thinks that that is his opinion on the football program in terms of coaching, recruiting, etc. But he ended up clarifying that it was a based on finances. So it's unfortunate to hear for a lot of Hog fans. And Hunter has voiced his issues with funding, either from the Classic Arkansan, and he's also made it known that the big time donors and can't cover it all, which is understandable. But the comments were certainly unfortunate to hear because Arkansas, in my opinion, has had some issue in terms of catching up with the times. Now with the House settlement, Arkansas does have a pot of money to use and pay players. And then, a big part of that too, in what Hunter was alluding to, was the third-party NIL deals to supplement, additional compensation for the players. So, Hunter, and that was the first two lanes and the other viral comment that he was talking about is this revenue path and also the NIL third-party deal path. So, I believe that, it might be true that Arkansas cannot compete for a national championship right now. Do I think that is all financial based? I don't tend to agree with Hunter on that.
Yeah, Collins, I'll ask you. I mean, you work in the NIL space. I mean, since the House settlement changed in June, how has that changed? Just, the entire landscape of NIL overall. Obviously, like they've got to, they have to go through NIL Go with Deloitte and all that stuff. But how has that revenue, the revenue sharing, house settlement, all that thing, how's that changed? Kind of what your job, kind of entails.
Yeah, certainly. So now schools are making financial offers, as I'll call them, that are really based on the revenue sharing money. So as you guys know, there's really two buckets now. There's the guaranteed revenue sharing money, which comes straight from the school. So the school will be on one side of the contract and the player will be on the other. Then there's the other bucket, which is the true NIL, which has been around since 2021. On that side of the contract, it's going to be the player and a third-party business. So after the house settlement passed, schools really turned their attention to revenue sharing, and that is what the offers to these players. That was the negotiations. And I represent some kids who are actually in high school right now, and so as of August 1st, these schools could give written offers or kind of more formal offers, as I'll call them, that relate to the revenue sharing. So it depends on the school, but a lot of these schools still have a collective or some type of equivalent where, although they wouldn't guarantee, as you mentioned, the NIL Go, I mean, nothing is guaranteed anymore when it comes to NIL money. Every deal over $600 has to go through this clearinghouse that Deloitte is reviewing for a legitimate business purpose to make sure the NIL deal isn't pay for play. So, of course, these schools, from my experience, have never guaranteed any NIL additional money. But, I think to survive in this day and age of the house settlement is, one, you have to be smart with your revenue sharing money. And that's just numbers, and that's basically a salary cap that professional teams have to deal with. So one is being smart with the numbers, paying, you pay more for the good players. It's elementary. But then the key, I think, going forward is to make sure you have the NIL money buttoned up as well, and that really comes down to the schools and GMs, athletic directors, relationships with the collective. And, I think these schools, as the house settlement's still new, a lot of these schools will have, connections, or I wouldn't call them guaranteed NIL deals, but they will have relationships with their trusted partners where, the student athlete can connect to these businesses through the GM and or the collective. And so I think that's been the obvious big difference, from my experience. 2021, it was all NIL. There was no revenue sharing. Back in 2021, too, it was the classic third-party deal with the player. And that was the classic, hey, I'm going to go down and sponsor the local car dealership, and I'll be put on a billboard, and I'll get money for that. And that was mostly how NIL worked right when 2021 happened, and players could receive monetary value for their NIL. Then there was the kind of strange part in the middle where everyone realized that schools were just paying people basically pay for play. And so, that was what everyone called the Wild West. So now, the house settlement, it's not perfect, but it's just another set of guidelines that schools have to adjust to. And again, that's the being smart with revenue sharing, and also still being able to facilitate NIL deals.
Yeah, one of the things that Hunter Yurachek talked about when he was talking about like the third lane, all those touchdown club comments, so he said there was a loophole that allowed schools to pay players directly from revenue sharing prior to June 30th. He said that a lot of the other schools were able to, but Arkansas wasn't able to. Can you explain? Can you explain that loophole? What that loophole was and how they were able to exploit it? And I guess Certainly. At the same time, why wasn't Arkansas?
Certainly. So from my, again, I I can't speak for Hunter, but here's the loophole that I think he was talking about. It wouldn't be revenue sharing money, okay, but it would still be NIL money. So the House settlement passed. Let's just, I don't have the specific dates in front of me, but let's just say it passed on June 6th, okay? So at that point, schools and players, et cetera, were, getting ready to enter this whole new world of the House settlement, collegiate athletics. But there was a little loophole in between when third-party NIL deals had to be disclosed through the NIL Go clearinghouse. So I've heard that, after the House settlement was announced as being approved, and that was, I think, probably 6 p.m. Okay. And so schools and player, representatives got on the phone to make sure their players were compensated without having to enter the deals in the NIL Go. And so the loophole was House settlement passed. There's going to be NIL Go, which was the clearinghouse. It's going to review and approve all the $600 deals and above. But that clearinghouse started, let's say, 24 hours later. So that was a long night for a lot of these schools and players to try to sign deals that were not going to be scrutinized. So going back to Hunter's comments, I think he said that they probably got some of those deals done with some of their top players. I'm assuming that's probably what happened. But, I think some of the other schools that he may be mentioning really had a true plan down and either thought this through, that there's going to be, hey, there is going to be a little loophole here that we need to exploit. And we really need to use these hours to make sure our guys get compensated, sign 2-year deals, whatever it may be. So I think a lot of that came down to planning, to first recognize that loophole, and then second, to move money around pretty quickly.
Yeah, and yeah, that's so. I mean, it sounds like Hunter said that they weren't able to kind of execute that to the same level that other schools were. So it sounds like they just did not have the NIL funds available to be able to do that. As a result, I mean, like Pittman talked a couple of days at the teleconference after Hunter's comments, and basically, he said this is probably going to set us back at the next recruiting class. Is it a situation, I mean, where maybe like other schools, obviously they've kind of got this year's team short up, so they're able to spend that full 25 or 20.5 or whatever they allot to next year? And is it something that we can expect for Arkansas to probably get outbid again in this next recruiting class?
Well, it depends. It depends on a lot of it depends on how Arkansas probably structured their budget. In a perfect world, it starts over every year, if you know what I mean. So, every year Arkansas would have, let's say they dedicate 75% of their revenue sharing money to football. That would be the salary cap for the year. So, a lot of schools sign players to, 1 or 2 year deals. So there might be a little bit of lag between where it's a true, new revenue sharing pot every year. But going back to Coach Pittman's comments, and I haven't listened to that, so I don't know if he was saying that the Hunter's comments about the football program not being competitive for a national championship, or two, just the lack of funds or funding or however Hunter was categorizing that and explaining that. It's just not good. no matter how you shake that out. You want kids. Arkansas needs to compete with other schools when it comes to finances and money, and revenue sharing. While it's not perfect, there is money there. So, with anything, it's identifying the right players, identifying how much money you want to expend, and finding the right football fits, which I think is number one key in this day and age still, is finding the right football fit, finding the kids who want to come play at the University of Arkansas, and money is not their, number one priority.
Just circling back a little bit, we were talking about, NIL Go and the new third-party system with Deloitte. One of the things that's come about that is this whole talk of fair market value for services to kind of regulate those services over $600 for NIL for players. What is your take on fair market value in this realm? How do you think that can be regulated, or I guess handled on a case by case basis?
It's difficult, and that's been one of the biggest issues with the House settlement, in my opinion, is you're policing these third party NIL deals more, and you're making them go through a clearinghouse. But at the end of the day, it's going to be these Deloitte employees' subjective beliefs as to what fair market value is. So I think it's very difficult. And there's different reports out there saying, Deloitte's, passing a lot of this stuff through without any issue, and it's really not that big of a deal. But then you have other reports out there saying that hey, they're rejecting a lot of deals for this business purpose. So first and foremost, I think they are looking at these. And number two, the issue is what is fair market value, and that's it's so difficult to determine. If you have a kid from Arkansas, who is some star high school player, comes up to the U of A, Arkansans know who he is. And let's say he also, or let's say he instead goes to some school across the country and no one knows. Everyone, people have a general idea who the recruits are and incoming freshmen are. But, you would think that the fair market value of his deal in Arkansas would certainly be more. And so there's so many factors that go into what is fair market value. And I don't think it's a perfect system, and I don't know really what the perfect system is. I guess you can say, hey, it is good that someone's looking these over. If the contract requires the player to post, 2 times over a 6-month period, and they're going to pay $1 million for that, is that fair market value? Probably not. But, it depends on the player. I'm a big, I'm personally a big free market, proponent when it comes to NIL and players' rights. So, I don't like the possibility of Deloitte making subjective decisions without taking into, kind of those factors that you really can't, describe on paper. So, it's there's pros and cons. Like I said, the pro is obviously making sure there's no outlandish deal out there for 2 posts for $1 million, for example. But the flip side is, I think as an athlete, for me representing athletes, I would certainly fight any determination that it's not fair market value. Because at the end of the day, I believe a lot of the times that if a business wants to pay a player, that's a good indication for fair market value. And I think it's not probably used in the NIL Go system, but the player's revenue sharing contract, whatever the school and the player decide on, could be a good factor too to determine fair market value of what the player's NIL is worth.
So, given all that we've kind of talked about so far tonight, Hunter Yurachek's comments, the state of rev share, the loopholes, all that sort of stuff. Generally, right now, what do you see Arkansas's outlook in terms of rev share and NIL, and what do you think it can be?
Yeah. So I mentioned this earlier. My personal opinion is Arkansas was a little bit behind the times at each step of this NIL world. I feel like they were behind the times in 2021 when it came to the first time players could earn money. Arkansas has publicly had many collectives that have fizzled out, or who knows. And so, it's been not a succinct process in having a good plan of attack, I feel like, at each step. Again, Hunter's comments about the loophole, it's finding, it's adjusting to this new world. Is finding a loophole, is that illegal? I mean, you can compare it to people in the tax code. I mean, is finding a loophole in the tax code illegal? No. So you have to just catch up with the times, make adjustments, honestly see what other schools are doing, and maybe mimic some of those practices. So, I think overall, though, I think Arkansas is making some good decisions when it comes to NIL. Hunter mentioned a few of those things of getting a football GM who has professional experience and things of that nature. So, I think I think Arkansas can go in a positive direction. Right now, having comments from your AD doesn't help the situation right now. And complaining about money and funding. My thought would be, put all the complaining aside. You have to deal with the cards you're dealt and figure out how to navigate the three lanes. Really, what Hunter talked about. Figure out how to best navigate revenue sharing. And that's with finding the right GMs, people who have experience in talent evaluation, professional sports. Those are very good GM candidates. Two, like I said, is coming up with a really good plan of connecting players with the collective, who in turn help out with NIL deals. Which it appears Arkansas is doing that now too. And then the third lane is what I think Hunter meant by that was making substantial payments in the NIL part of this. And I think that maybe where Arkansas is lacking is I don't consider it illegal or anything like that. It's finding deals that will pass through the NIL clearinghouse is really, at the end of the day, what it's going to take. So again, I can see how fans, saw Hunter's speech as doom and gloom, and it's never going to get better. But I just personally, I think some better planning instead of worrying about stuff that's out of his control would be a great step.
All right, Collins, last question. So given that, maybe it's not all doom and gloom, maybe it's about proper planning moving forward, but also where Arkansas is right now with the AD making those sorts of comments and with the AD and the coach kind of saying they're a little bit behind. How has that impacted recruiting, particularly in-state, since that's the area that really well is the in-state recruits? How do you think that has impacted it?
Yeah, so I do represent a couple of the in-state guys in this 2026 class. Like I said, from a player representation standpoint, all this starts so much earlier now. Because schools are negotiating with these kids and their families August 1st of their senior year, so technically before the first game of their senior year. So Arkansas, it's no secret, at least in this 2026 class, from what I know is they really don't prioritize paying high school recruits top dollar, And I'm not saying that's bad at all. It's just it's a philosophical thing. It's you have this pot of money, and if you want to spend it on transfers and things of that nature, that's great. Or if you want to make sure you have enough to retain your top guys and make sure they stay another year, I mean, that's great. And so, I think a lot of that in terms of finances will be a kind of philosophical kind of methodology thing that the GM and coach will make a decision on. But the key with the in-state recruiting, in my opinion, is just the culture and, making the program in a place where, kids from Arkansas want to play. They want to put on the red and white. I've been fortunate enough with my clients. Money has not been the top priority. I think a lot of college football fans think that all these kids want to find the top dollar at every school, and that's where they go. And that's just not true, at least from my experience. I mean, certainly there are kids and families who are going where the top dollar is. There's no question on that. But a lot of time, and what I personally tell my clients is, hey, you have to find the right football fit first and foremost, because once you find the right football fit, that's when the money will naturally start coming. And you can build and develop with that program. So again, going back to recruiting, Arkansas is going to have probably 15 million to 17 million to divvy up, or probably less than that. But it depends on how much they actually divvy up with the football program. So at the end of the day, Arkansas is going to have substantial money to offer to recruits, especially in-state kids. But again, I think it just comes down to the philosophical question of, are we going to pay a high schooler who's never stepped on the field at a college level X amount of dollars, or are we going to pay the guy who wants to transfer to Arkansas, the top dollar? And so, again, money certainly helps, and it's certainly a business decision for a lot of these kids and these families now. But I think it really just comes down to, for Arkansas at least, trying to prioritize these kids in state. And from my personal opinion, in my lifetime, in-state kids who come to Arkansas, that's when our best teams are. You can go back a long time and see, when Arkansas builds around their in-state guys, good things happen. So, I think money is certainly a part of this. But again, I think a lot of it comes down to football fit, coaching, priority, things of that nature, kind of the non-monetary. Back to the old recruiting days. It's finding the right place for you, and so that's probably my take on that.
All right, Collins, thanks so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate you coming on and talking to us for a bit.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You can find Collins on Twitter or X at @CHickman_12. If you want to follow him at all, he's always putting out some good stuff on the NIL market nationally and locally. So thank you so much, Collins, for joining us. And that'll be our show tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks, Dan, for joining me. This has been the HawgBeat Half Hour.